This record-setting sports car was the last of the Japanese Roadsters, born out of the first Japanese Roadsters. This is the Honda S2000. Born out of the fires of World War II, Soichiro Honda founded the Honda Motor Company shortly after. And they were making a very good selection of bikes, motorbikes to be specific, and they were pretty good, but pretty soon they wanted to branch out to four wheels. And that is where the S600 comes into play, at least for this story. Because the S600 is an evolution of the S500, which in itself is an evolution of the S360, which in itself is one of the first Hondas ever made, excluding some crappy K car pickup truck. But the S600 was Honda's first mass-market car. And it was the first Honda ever with more than one trim level, available as a coupe or a convertible. It had a 606cc four-cylinder making 57 horsepower, because it's a K car, and that's all they can make for the narrow streets of Tokyo. It's not a lot, but it looked good, and it sold very well. It launched Honda. This car literally launched Honda Motors. It sold over 12,000 of these things in 3 years. So, in a response to the success, Honda decided bigger is better and went with the S800. And this was a true game changer for Honda because by 1967, they had swapped out the old chain drive system. It didn't even have a drive shaft, and they had chain drive, so they swapped it out for an actual drive shaft, and they swapped the drum brakes with disc brakes because it's a sports car, which meant it was light, and it could handle well. And with Honda's experience with motorcycles, they could craft a phenomenal 800cc engine, four-cylinder, 800cc mind you, that made 70 horsepower. I know what you're thinking, that's not a lot, but look at it this way. When you do the math, that is about 1.5 horsepower per cubic inch. For comparison's sake, the mighty 427 Shelby Cobra makes 1.1 horsepower per cubic inch. This is an incredibly potent engine. And more impressively, it revved up to almost 10,000 RPM. The only current road car, as of recording this video, that revs higher is the Ariel Atom V8 at 10,500. It's a phenomenal engine, especially for the mid-1960s. This is one of the best engines arguably ever put in a sports car for what it is. It's not fast, it's not powerful, but for its size, for its budget, for the company that created it, it was a monumentally impressive engine, and that is why we are talking about the S800, because you can think of it as just a back catalog in Honda's history, but it launched Honda Motor, the S-Series Roadster. But strangely, as Mr. Honda's influence on the company dwindled, so did their sports cars, and they switched to much more practical, much more economical family cars. Not a problem, it sold well, it helped solidify them in the global market, but Honda's roots were always in the S800, the S600 cars, sports cars, like that. But we wouldn't see another one of those for nearly 3 decades, when in 1995, Honda launched the SSM concept car. And you know what? It was quite good. So good that enough public interest was drawn up that in 1999, Honda officially launched a brand new S-Roadster. But they had some rules first. It had to be light. It had to have 50-50 weight distribution, and it had to be naturally aspirated, high revving, just in a homage to their own motorcycle engines from the S600 and the S800. And when it launched, critics loved the handling thanks to the strong yet light X-Bone chassis, the clever suspension, and the sub 3,000 pound curb weight. And just like the S800 of old, the engine was a technological masterpiece. It had an 11.7 to 1 compression ratio. And when the VTEC system was added, the 2-liter naturally aspirated F20C engine made 247 horsepower at 9,000 RPM. That was good enough to make it the highest specific output per liter of any road car in the world until the Ferrari 458. And Honda also put the engine between the front axle and the driver, not only giving it an iconic side profile with a long hood and a short deck, just like the classic Roadsters of old, it also gave it 50-50 weight distribution on the dot, improving handling. When you put all of this together, it had a top speed of 150 miles an hour, and did 0 to 100 and back to 0 again in under 25 seconds. It was a fantastic car, and it wasn't even that crazy expensive either. And even more bizarrely, Japan did not get all of the limited editions. If you get like a Supra Mark IV or an R34 GTR, you get all of those special editions in Japan. But with the S2000, it wasn't the case. Their most notable special edition for this generation anyway is called the Type V, made in 2000, which stood for Variable Gear Ratio Steering. If you're wondering what that is, it's a computer that actually changes the gear ratios depending on the cornering speed and the steering angle to give you the best possible acceleration out of any corner. That's quite impressive. I don't know how much of that is still used in cars today, if it was just like a novelty thing that worked but was sort of impractical, but the fact that it did work is kind of amazing, and I love it for that. But not everybody loved the S2000. Mostly Americans, because, well, in order to reduce engine friction, i.e. making it rev really, really high and really, really fast, peak power doesn't arrive until 8,300 RPM, with VTEC not activating until 6,000 RPM, which means that if you're below that, you have absolutely nothing at all and it's horrifically slow. So you have to constantly work the engine. It's actually encouraged to run that engine as hard as possible, and that can get pretty tiring on a daily basis, I'm going to be honest. So, in 2004, Honda decided to facelift the S2000 into something called the AP2. And by the way, didn't mention it because it wasn't really that important, but the first generation was called the AP1 because that is how you do numerical naming systems, Porsche. This was a pretty big departure from the S2000 of the AP1 because it had some styling tweaks, which I think makes it look like one of the best looking Japanese sports cars in a very long time. It is a gorgeous car. And it's got some tuned suspension, but the biggest change by far is the engine. Instead of the 2-liter F20C, it now has a 2.2-liter 4-cylinder, again naturally aspirated, this time making more torque, but a much more manageable 7,800 RPM, which means you can actually drive it almost on a day-to-day basis. It was quite good. But critically, it kept the spirit of the S2000, of the S-Roadsters in general, despite having the lower RPM limit, the drive-by-wire throttle, the new electronic stability control, those fancy speakers, all that. It still kept the roots of the S2000 alive, and that is what made it so damn good. But if you thought that all that made the S2000 soft, Honda would like to have a word with you. And that word is called the Club Racer. Sort of like the Viper's American Club Racer, the S2000's Club Racer was a track-focused race car for the road. It had wider sport tires, stiffer suspension, a new steering rack, and a functional body kit that reduced lift by up to 80%. This was a clever car. In order to lower the center of gravity, the folding roof was axed in favor of a good old-fashioned removable hardtop, and both the air conditioning and the radio became optional extras, which I think is the perfect way to do that, because you can either have a more normal car, or you can have the crazy fast, lightweight, tricked out version. Either one, Honda was okay with. And if you want to know how devoted Honda was to engineering, they designed the gear shift knob to reduce shift stroke and increase shift load. Just the little gear knob had a function, not just to hold it. That is how devoted Honda was to the performance of this thing. And it worked. It was a sub 2,800 pound sports car that blew people away in the corners. And because Honda designed it specifically to show appreciation to the American buyers of the S2000, we were the only ones that got it. Japan got a softer, more comfortable, tamer type S version, but we got the best version of a Japanese sports car. That doesn't happen very often. Now, there was supposed to be a Type R that was in discussions, that the Club Racer was going to slot in between the Type S and the Type R. But for a reason I'm about to get into, less than 3,000 of both the Type S and the CR got produced. Because, well, the Club Racer came out in 2008, and launching your track-focused, high-revving, monstrous sports car in the middle of a global recession is bad. And S2000 production as a whole didn't even make it through 2009. Damn. So that begs the question. We haven't seen one in 12 years. Will we ever see another one? Well, we have good news and bad news. Honda is on a roll with the Type R Civic and the NSX are both great sports car machines, and it has proven that Honda can make a great sports car. But at the same time, they have left Formula 1 and left the British Touring Car Championship, so it's very much mixed signals there. What I do know is that we are rapidly approaching the 60th anniversary of the original S360 Roadster, and the 60th anniversary of Honda as a whole in 2024. So the timing is definitely right, and with the rise of new Japanese sports cars like the Nissan 400Z, the Supra Mark V, the GR86, we are in a new golden era of Japanese sports cars, so we will have to see what Honda does next.